Jim Parsons has his act together. The Big Bang Theory drew 18 million viewers each week thanks in large part to his character Sheldon Cooper. You are actually the most paid television actor in the world, according to Forbes, and he was earning $1 million every time the cameras rolled. Then Jim received an incredible offer with a $50 million contract. Jim refused to play Sheldon for a couple more seasons, even though that was all he needed to do. And it is due to this sinister factor associated with the Big Bang Theory. For Jim Parsons, summer 2018 was meant to be normal, but it wasn't. Parsons himself described the convergence of life events that occurred during those harsh months between seasons 11 and 12 as almost cosmic. When the dust settled, the longest-running multi-camera sitcom in television history was complete. Everything happened at once. Let's begin with the heartache. Jim and Todd Spiewak, his spouse, had 2 pets. Since Jim was 31, they had reared them jointly. One of those 14-year-old dogs was near death. Jim was in New York City at the time, performing in The Boys in the Band revival 8 times a week on Broadway. However, he wasn't limited to Broadway. When filming called for it, he would take a plane back to Los Angeles before returning to New York for another week of shows. The schedule was incredibly harsh, and his dog's condition was rapidly getting worse. He told of a stroll in the park just prior to a commercial shot. The dog had a very bad appearance. Parsons was emotionally broken, worn out, and hardly able to keep his composure. Todd, his spouse, reminded him of their obligations and that everyone had adjusted their schedules to make room for him. Because he wasn't there for the dog he had spent 14 years of his life with, Jim simply started crying. However, what option did he have? Jim's career was at its height at this period. He was more than a TV celebrity. Everyone in Hollywood wanted to share in his fame because he was a celebrity. The next day, Jim and Todd had to make the painful decision to put their cherished dog to sleep at home since Jim continued to balance work and his commitment to his dog. At this moment, Jim thought he would be able to move on from this experience, but he was unable to do so. Additionally, something else occurred when he was still coping with the death of his dog. Jim broke his foot severely when he was back on stage with the Boys in the Band, just a few days after he had put his dog to sleep. Nevertheless, despite being in excruciating pain, he continued to perform. After that, he discovered something terrifying while at the hospital. The human body is brittle and prone to sudden rupture. This performer required movement in order to play his parts. He was also tending to an ailment that might have ended his career. Jim thought he was looking into a chasm. If he was unable to return to the stage, what would have happened? What would the producers do? How would he respond if he failed everyone who relied on him? He bounced back, though, and returned to the stage. But he was still afraid of the thoughts of his own vulnerability. Then the actual fear struck. The darkness begins here. At the age of 52, Jim's father passed away. Jim had just turned 26 at the time. Parsons turned 45 in 2018. He got to work on the calculations. He would be 47 years old at the conclusion of a possible season 14 deal, only 5 years shy of the age his father never attained. Parsons clarified during his podcast interview that he is not superstitious or anything. It just had to do with context. That's what he termed context. However, what he truly meant was that everyone fears death, the clock, and the finish line, things that no one discusses. His dad did not live to be 53. Imagine that Parsons had just 6 more years left. Did he want to spend those years, those priceless, irreplaceable years, wearing the same superhero t-shirts and the same soundstage? He was plagued by the question and frantically looked for solutions. It appears that Sheldon is not all-knowing after all. Todd persisted in encouraging them to collaborate on fresh artistic endeavors in the interim. Jim was never available, even though That's Wonderful Productions, which they had created in 2015, had already inked a significant overall deal with Warner Brothers Television. He was constantly filming, performing, and working on other projects. Todd wanted to build this production firm they had created and use it. However, Jim was legally bound to film 8 episodes of The Big Bang Theory in Los Angeles over the course of around 22 weeks. In addition, he performed 8 times a week on Broadway in New York. He then signed on to play Henry Wilson in the Netflix limited series Hollywood, as if that weren't intense enough. That means more weeks of non-stop shooting. Jim was continually going from coast to coast, learning new scripts, playing whole different roles, and maintaining the exact timing needed for both live theater and television. In addition, he had a business agreement with Intel that forced him to work throughout his supposed week off. He had been worn out. Rest was what his body and mind cried out for. He was extremely exhausted from all of his obligations. Then he started to wonder if he could continue the Big Bang Theory for a longer period of time. Now he knew the answer. Time to give up. After that dreadful summer in New York, Jim moved back to Los Angeles in August 2018. For weeks, this choice had been weighing heavily on him. He knew what needed to be done. He spent a Sunday at Chuck Lorre's residence. The Big Bang Theory's co-creator is Chuck Lorre. Jim informed Chuck that he would not be signing for seasons 13 and 14. Chuck understood right once, and according to several accounts, he was sympathetic and even supportive of the choice. He also brought up the fact that both men were previously aware of. Without Sheldon Cooper, the show would not be able to go on. The Big Bang Theory, the title itself, and the entire premise all made reference to Sheldon's theoretical physics research. No show, Sheldon. Chuck made no attempt to persuade Parsons. He didn't give him extra cash. He simply agreed to it. After a table read, Johnny Galecki, Kay Cuoco, music, Simon Helberg, Kumail Nanjiani, Mayim Bialik, and Melissa Rauch. The people he'd worked with for over a decade, his television family. A few days later, Jim convened the cast in his dressing room and told them the same thing he had told Chuck. Everyone started crying. Johnny Galecki later acknowledged that he was caught off guard. Not because Jim made the choice in the first place, but rather because Jim approached the creators before consulting his fellow actors, music. That's when they became like a family. Jim ought to have visited them initially as well. Perhaps he would have realized Johnny was also exhausted. Johnny was already doubting his ability to perform well after all this time. Even others who were initially offended by the choice came to see that Jim could have been the only one with the courage to speak up. On August 22, 2018, CBS and Warner Brothers announced that the longest-running multi-camera sitcom in television history would cease with season 12. Those were still enormous, but not due to ratings. The authors still had things to tell, so it wasn't due to creative tiredness, rather, it was because one of the show's main actors just said, "Music, no." Thus, Jim's departure from the show was not caused by a particular scene. The Big Bang Theory sequences were no longer as new after airing for so long, and it was a mix of other factors. But the cast felt as though the show was a part of them because of its longevity. On Instagram, Kay Cuoco wrote that she was crying uncontrollably. Mayim Bialik wrote on her feelings of thankfulness, which were both bittersweet. People began to raise questions, and the whole entertainment business was shocked. How come he would leave? What could possibly be worth sacrificing that level of wealth and achievement? This is when the mess starts. It began to circulate that Jim had received an offer of $50 million for 2 further seasons from CBS. That figure was repeated in every entertainment venue until it was taken for granted. However, Jim then made a crucial clarification. In reality, there was no such agreement, and Jim had accepted that sum of money. Would he, music, have stayed if that amount of money had been offered? For seasons 13 and 14, CBS was in preliminary talks. If the agreement went through, the cast, especially the core 5, were anticipated to receive about $50 million apiece, including profits. However, Jim made his choice prior to the creation of official contracts. Sheldon Cooper's adventure was finished by the time season 12 concluded. He was a Nobel laureate. His spouse was Amy Farrah Fowler. From the inflexible, socially awkward genius, he had become a person who could truly love and be a friend. In one of the most poignant speeches in sitcom history, he had made amends with his buddies. Jim said it was like finishing a fantastic book. You don't just add more chapters because the book is a hit. You conclude the narrative. He did, therefore. He decided to leave after taking a look around. But he did it with flair. 18.5 million viewers watched The Big Bang Theory's 2-hour conclusion in real time. In the days that followed, millions more streamed it. It turned into one of the most watched scripted endings of the previous 10 years. A good way to conclude a show that has dominated television for 12 years. Jim said he never regretted leaving, but he was worried that it was the wrong choice. Is he being honest, in your opinion? Jim Parsons was merely a Texas theater kid before he became the highest-paid actor on television. Jim was born in Houston on March 24, 1973, and grew up in the northern suburb of Spring. His mother taught. His father was a plumber's supply company owner. With one exception, his family and his early years in music were typical. Jim's dream of being an actor was clear from the age of 6. He portrayed the Coca-Cola bird in a school production of The Elephant's Child. Then something made sense. It wasn't simply fun for him. He was certain that this was his destiny, with the type of assurance that most 6-year-olds never experience. After high school, however, worry started to set in. He made an effort to give it all up. When he first enrolled at the University of Houston, he stayed away from theater. Convinced it was too dangerous to pursue as a career. His choice appeared responsible and sensible. Parents can rest well knowing that this decision was made. It was roughly 2 years long. Jim came to a realization. When not acting, he was a miserable man. He switched from music to theater as his major and never looked back. Jim produced a lot of work while he was at the University of Houston. Over the course of 3 years, he made 17 appearances. Before it closed in 2007, Infernal Bridegroom Productions, a theater company he co-founded, presented numerous productions. He started doing shows at the Houston Stage's Repertory Theater on a regular basis. He had an obsession. Jim realized he needed extra training after graduating. After submitting applications to graduate programs, he was accepted into the University of San Diego's prestigious 2-year program, where he taught in collaboration with the Old Globe Theater. That year, just 7 pupils were admitted. It was later acknowledged by Rick Sear, the program director, that he was hesitant to accept Parsons. Jim has a really distinct personality. One factor contributing to his popularity is his complete originality. We were concerned, though, since does that translate to classical theater? Apparently, it did. In order to pursue his goals, Parsons went to New York City as soon as he earned his Master of Fine Arts degree in 2001. Jim Parsons did not fare well in New York. He had trouble. By his own estimation, he tried out for 15 to 30 TV pilots. Occasionally, he would get cast, music, but no network would pick up the pilot. He would occasionally make it to callbacks just to be turned down. Occasionally, he would fail to go past the initial round. He made ends meet by performing in Broadway productions and running TV ads. He has a brief cameo on the program Ed in 2002. He starred in the independent movie Garden State in a small part in 2004. He was given a recurring role on Judging Amy in 2004. It wasn't a huge break. These were jobs that were necessary for survival, like barely making ends meet. Then, in 2006, he tried out for The Big Bang Theory, a brand new CBS sitcom. Jim instantly identified with anything out of the ordinary after reading the pilot script. The persona wasn't the cause. Jim has stated time and time again that he didn't have a personal connection to Sheldon Cooper. The conversation was key. He entered the audition and gave a performance that was so accurate and well-balanced that the creator, Chuck Lorre, demanded a second go. Lorre needed to confirm that Jim's recent actions were not an isolated incident and that he could repeat them. Jim returned and repeated it. For 12 seasons, Sheldon Cooper would be defined by the same accuracy, rhythm, and strange charm. Thus, the music part was his. Reviews of the music were mixed when The Big Bang Theory debuted on September 24, 2007. Audiences adored music, this musical about socially awkward scientists, but critics weren't sure what to think of it. With almost 12 million viewers each episode by season 3, it was CBS's highest-rated program. In the same way that others collect coffee mugs, Jim was also collecting trophies. He was the recipient of the 2010, 2011, 2013, 2014 Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Lead Actor in a Comedy Series. 2011 saw him win a Golden Globe. From 2009 to 2014, he received an Emmy nomination every year. His pay was a reflection of his power. Along with co-stars Kay Cuoco and Johnny Galecki, he signed contracts in 2010 that guaranteed them $200,000 per episode. That figure surged to 1 million episodes every season by 2014, adding more than 1% to the show's revenue. Forbes called Jim the highest-paid television actor in the world from 2015 to 2018. His earnings in 2017 alone totaled $27.5 million. Not bad for a Houston-born theater kid who struggled to make ends meet in New York for years. He continued to do theater while controlling television. He debuted on Broadway in Larry Kramer's music, AIDS crisis play, The Normal Heart, in 2011. For Jim, a gay man who had been dating Todd Spywax since 2002. Music, it was a very personal endeavor. In 2012, he portrayed Lude P. Dow in a Harvey revival. He played the role of God in An Act of God in 2015. He made the decision to go from The Big Bang Theory in the same year, 2018. He was a part of the Broadway production of The Boys in the Band during its 50th anniversary. The Tony Award for Best Play Revival went to that production in 2018. In the 2020 movie adaptation, every member of the cast, including Parsons, played their parts again. Jim never had to choose between the theater and television. In some way, he simultaneously performed both with equal dedication and skill, music, until his body and mind ultimately urged him to calm down. Does he still film The Big Bang Theory now if he hadn't abandoned theater? After the conclusion of The Big Bang Theory in 2019, the universe continued to exist. The first was Young Sheldon, a 7-season prequel series that ended in 2024. Parsons was executive producer and narrator, although he didn't make an on-screen appearance until the end of the series. Then came The First Marriage Between Georgie and Mandy, which is today a CBS spin-off. However, the main query that everyone has is regarding Stewart Fails to Save the Universe, the most recent spin-off. This is an amazing show. It is the first spin-off of Big Bang Theory that is not a prequel, and it is presently in development at HBO Max. It takes place in the present and centers on Kevin Sussman's character, Stuart Bloom, the owner of a comic book store who is always unfortunate. The official description claims that Stewart unintentionally causes a multiverse Armageddon by breaking a gizmo that Sheldon and Leonard developed. In the process of restoring reality, he will come across Big Bang Theory characters from other universes. Lauren Lapkus is back as Denise, music, Stewart's girlfriend in the cast. Geologist Bert Kibler, played by Brian Posehn, and Barry Kripke, played by John Ross Bowie, are back. Additionally, the premise makes explicit reference to the device that Sheldon and Leonard created, indicating that they play a key role in the story. Will Jim Parsons show up then? Parsons has stated his position in a number of recent interviews. No, he won't. However, is this a marketing ploy to take people by surprise? Jim's return isn't entirely out of the question. Does he wish to come back? The problem with Stewart is that he is unable to save the universe. Since it deals with various realities in different universes, it is technically possible to bring Sheldon, Leonard, and the rest of the original cast back without having them play their precise parts again. They may portray Sheldons from alternative timelines, Sheldons from malevolent universes, or Sheldons with different decisions. In essence, the multiverse concept is a free pass for the authors to do what they like. There are a lot of unpublished Sheldon stories, music, because of the multiverse, even though Sheldon's story is complete. It remains to be seen if Jim will exploit that weakness. When questioned directly about the return of Jim and Johnny Galecki, franchise creator Chuck Lurie has been noticeably cryptic. In Hollywood, it's common for negotiations to be ongoing when he doesn't confirm or deny. Jim hasn't exactly been unwinded since leaving The Big Bang Theory. In the 2020 movie adaptation of The Boys in the Band, he played Michael again. For his portrayal of Henry Wilson in the Netflix limited series Hollywood, he was nominated for an Emmy. He starred in the romance drama Spoiler Alert in 2022, which was about a relationship impacted by terminal cancer. Music: Parsons' poignant, vulnerable performance earned the movie a lot of praise from critics. Parsons made a second appearance on Broadway in 2024, this time in Mother Play in Our Town. He was nominated for a Tony Award for Mother Play's Best Featured Actor in a Play. In addition, he has continued to serve as narrator and executive producer for the Big Bang Theory series, continuing to be associated as Sheldon Cooper without having to don the superhero t-shirts. Fans hope to see Sheldon Cooper once more. The character is recognizable. A generation of television humor was defined by Parsons' portrayal. Bazinga became a term in the culture. Sheldon's place on the couch was considered holy. Will it be worth it to bring Sheldon back, though?